You feel me? But I'm a real street nigga, Inglewood NHP. You feel me? I ain't gonna lie, to turned it up. So, I had to turn him down.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we tapping into the streets of LA. We're gonna be talking about the neighborhood Pirus versus Inglewood 13, aka Inglewood 13, and other rival gangs. Now the neighborhood Pirus, aka NHP, formed back in the 1970s on the west side of Inglewood, around Rogers Park. Now their hood sits between Hyde Park Boulevard and Ivy Boulevard on Beach Avenue. The neighborhood Pirus has two main cliques, the 500 block and the 700 block. Now the neighborhood Pirus are cool with a lot of gangs like the Rolling 20 neighborhood Bloods, the Avenue Pirus, the 20 Outlaws, and other gangs. But they also been known to beef with the Inglewood 13, the Rolling 60s, the Raymond Avenue Crips, and even at one point, Queen Street, which we're gonna touch on a little bit later in this video. On July 25th, 2005, neighborhood Piru member Dante Loeb was taking out the trash. Dante lived with his mother in an apartment located on 78th and Crenshaw Boulevard. Now this area is only 7 blocks from the Rolling 60s area. At around 6 p.m. after taking out the trash, Dante sat on the planter's box when two men crossed the street and approached him. Josh Roberts, aka Tiny Khaki Blue, and Darren Cooper, Young Khaki Blue, both from Rolling 60s. Darren Cooper was wearing all red to intentionally blend in with the surrounding neighborhood. Once they approached Dante, Cooper said, "What up, blood?" And Dante looked at Cooper and said, "Hey man, you need to be careful wearing all that red." When suddenly, Darren Cooper pulled out a gun and opened fire. Dante was hit 4 times, fatally wounding him. Cooper and Roberts both were seen by witnesses running back across the street and hopping into a car and driving off. After the police would arrive, Cooper and Roberts would have Cooper's girlfriend named LJ take them back to the scene of the crime just to double check to make sure that Dante was dead. About 3 months later, Darren Cooper's girlfriend named LJ will contact the police and implicate both Roberts and Cooper as the shooters. There will be a total of 4 eyewitnesses that will come forward and ID both Rolling 60 members as the shooters. Eventually, Darren Cooper and Roberts both would be arrested and be charged and convicted of first-degree murder. Both men were tried together and was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison. Now, just 4 years later after this, we will see the war with the neighborhood Pirus and the Inglewood 13 kick off heavy. On January 19, 2009, Inglewood 13 member Jonathan Donis, aka Vamps, and a man named Moreno will be out looking for rivals to shoot. Jonathan Donis, aka Vamp, at this point had only been an Inglewood 13 member for just about 7 months, and he had something to prove. And his very first target would be a man named Brian K., who was loading items into the back of his van on Morley Avenue at around 11:45 p.m. As the Inglewood 13 members pulled up, Donis would ask Brian where he was from, and immediately Brian responded he didn't gangbang. Shockingly, Donis believed him, and the Inglewood 13 members drove off. But immediately after this, Brian K. would call the police. Only 10 minutes later, Donis would find a group of men walking around the 500 block in the neighborhood Piru area. The 3 men including Ivan Avalos, Jose Garcia, and Carlos Aguilar. As the Inglewood 13 members pulled up, Donis would yell out, "Where y'all from?" And Ivan responded, "We not from nowhere." And Donis would immediately reply, "Fuck my yates." And they would then drive off. But after driving off, the Inglewood 13 would circle right back again to drive by the 3 men. But Donis would spot a black man named Arthur Minter, who was an off-duty police officer, walking to his car. The Inglewood 13 would then speed up to pull up next to Minter, and they immediately asked him where he was from. And before Minter could say anything, Donis yelled out, "Fuck my yates." And that's when Minter responded, "What?" And as Minter attempted to get into his car, that's when Donis pulled out his strap and started blasting. Minter would be hit as he fell to the ground, but as he hit the ground, Minter would reach for his service weapon and return fire on the Inglewood 13 members, who immediately drove off. Minter was hit in his back, which caused damage to his lung, but he would survive his injuries, which would require multiple surgeries. Jonathan Donis of Inglewood 13 would be identified by Arthur Minter, Brian K., and the other 3 men that were in contact with him the night of the shooting. Once arrested, Jonathan Donis would tell police the entire idea was Moreno's, and that Moreno was the shooter. Donis would claim that Moreno wanted to shoot all blacks because it was Martin Luther King Day, and also because Moreno had been shot recently by the neighborhood Pirus. But during the trial, the jury did not buy Donis' story, and Donis was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Now, over the next few years, the violence would kick up heavy with back and forth shootings with the neighborhood Pirus and the Inglewood Treses. Several months later, on November 9th, a group of Inglewood Trese members included Antonio Tavares, aka Batman, and a woman named Claudia were at a house on the 400 block of Edgewood when out of nowhere, members of neighborhood Piru would drive by and open fire on the group. Claudia was struck in the chest and Antonio was struck in the head. By the time paramedics arrived, both will be taken to separate hospitals and both will be pronounced dead. The next shooting that would take place will be on April 24th, 2010.
Drexler Boyce should be. This corner of Beach Avenue and Venice Way in Inglewood is where bullets almost literally tore the life from his 18-year-old body.
Drexler was waiting at this bus stop back here for the bus, and he was confronted by two male Hispanics in a white Honda, older model. He told the officers that they banged on him. To us, that means that they were asking him what gang he was affiliated with.
The timeline's a little confusing here because Drexler was able to tell this to police after he had been shot, but before he died of his wounds. Detective De La Torre picks up the story where we left off.
And at that point, one of them exited the vehicle, and he stood up to run, and they fired 3 shots at him from approximately 15 feet away, hit him in the lower back, and then on one of his arms.
Now, months later, on November 18, 2010, Inglewood Trese member Augustin Jorge, aka Lil Sicko, was on the 400 block of Hyde Park. At around 3 p.m., Jorge was walking out of a liquor store when a black male walked up on him and shot him in the abdomen and the torso and once in the head. Paramedics would rush him to the hospital where he would remain on life support for several days, and on Thanksgiving, he would officially be pronounced dead. Now, the shooters of this incident were believed to be members of the neighborhood Piru, but no one was ever arrested for his murder. Nearly 6 months later, on April 20th, 2011, Inglewood Trese member Jose Flores, aka Fat Boy, was riding his bike near Arbor and Oak Street when 2 gunmen from neighborhood Piru would pull up and open fire as he rode his bike. Jose Flores will be fatally wounded. By the time the EMTs arrived, he would be pronounced dead at the scene. Now, on September 27, 2011, neighborhood Piru member by the name of Levester Peterson was at the Lotus Motel on Manchester when a known Inglewood Trese member named Danny Trujillo, aka Beaver, would approach him. Immediately, Beaver asked Peterson where he was from, and Peterson responded, "I'm from neighborhood Piru. You from Pex?" And Beaver responded, "No, I'm from MS-13. So after hearing this, Peterson was relaxed because the Pirus weren't beefing with MS-13. Beaver then will go on to ask Peterson for a cigarette, but Peterson would tell him that he didn't have one. And after this brief conversation, both men will go their separate ways. Hours later, Peterson will be leaving the motel and will begin walking to a nearby 7-Eleven when he looked across the street and saw his friend named Crosby, who began yelling at him. Crosby would yell out, "Run, run." Suddenly, Peterson heard gunshots, and as he turned around, he saw Beaver from Inglewood Trese holding his gun out, yelling, "Fuck you, Holmes." And that's when Beaver started blasting. Peterson began running across the street, but his leg began to go numb as he collapsed on the ground. And in that moment, he realized he had been shot. But Crosby was able to help him across the street, and the Inglewood Trese member Beaver would take off and flee the scene. Peterson and Crosby were able to call the police, and 911 arrived, and Peterson would be treated by the EMTs for his injuries. Neighborhood Piru member Peterson would give a statement to the police describing the shooter. Not only would Peterson ID him, but his friend Crosby would also identify Beaver from Inglewood Trese. Eventually, Beaver would be arrested for attempted murder, and after his trial, he will be found guilty of attempted murder and sentenced to 35 years to life in prison. Now, this very same year, we will see the neighborhood Piru's beef extend out to other known blood gangs. Neighborhood Piru member Jomo Zambia, aka Rosemo 700, will go viral online after allegedly knocking out the rapper Game at the Fox Hill Mall.
He's a loudmouth ass nigga. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how he talks to, them punk ass niggas over there in Black Wall Street camp. You feel me? But I'm a real street nigga from Inglewood NHP, and I'm not finna let no nigga with a red mohawk, who had butterflies on his face, and you feel me? I ain't gonna lie, the nigga turned it up. But you feel me? So, I had to turn him down a notch, you feel me? And I laid his ass out. Feel me? I hit him with that banger. That's that, you know what I'm saying, Smoking Joe Frazier left hook.
Now, this would not be the only incident that Rosemo will be involved with. He will next be seen on camera beating up a Queen Street Blood member known as Bosco 100. But after the Bosco incident, this would not go unanswered. Only weeks later, after attacking Bosco, Rosemo will be driving down Florence Avenue in his red BMW when a vehicle pulled up next to him and opened fire. Rosemo was hit several times and ended up losing control of his car and he crashed into a nearby police cruiser. Paramedics and fire trucks would arrive and would have to use the jaws of life to get him out of the vehicle, but Rosemo would die from his injuries. Now, after the death of Rosemo, Queen Street Blood member Bosco would be arrested on camera on suspicion related to this shooting, but no charges were ever filed, and he was eventually released. But word on the street would be that the alleged shooter of Rosemo 700's death was a known Queen Street Blood known as Diablo. Now, Diablo was one of the few Hispanics that ran with the Queen Street Bloods, and according to Bosco, Diablo was a wild man who was fearless but had a knack for checking people, and that would ultimately lead to his death years later.
I don't know, we was hanging out, chilling, drunk, drinking and shit, chilling. Got in the car to take me home. I'm going home, and we pulled to a stoplight. Car just pulled up out of nowhere and sprayed us. Just spray the car up. He ended up getting killed first. He got shot in the head.
Now, it's been alleged that it was members of Inglewood 13, but that is just a rumor and it's not been confirmed. Now, just 2 years later, on February 17, 2014, Akeem Leggins and Theron Domino met up at a bus stop on Venice Way and Beach Avenue. Leggins rode his bike to the bus stop as Domino rode a scooter to the bus stop. As the two men began talking, a silver F-150 truck pulled up, and inside that truck were members of Inglewood 13, Victor Saldana, aka Little Magic, and another man known as Bones from Inglewood 13. Little Magic would get out the truck, and Domino would see him and immediately take off running. As Magic started walking towards Leggins, Magic began pulling out a revolver, and Leggins tried to escape by turning on his bike, but by the time he was able to turn, Magic had already pulled out his gun and opened fire. Magic would shoot Leggins 4 times in his back, fatally wounding him. Magic would then hop back in the truck, and the Inglewood 13 members would drive off. As Domino ran for help, he was able to call the police, but by the time EMTs would arrive, they would find Leggins slumped over, laying on the bike, and he would later be pronounced dead at the hospital. But it wouldn't take long for police to identify the suspects. The truck they used was reported stolen just hours before this murder, and inside that truck, police would recover a backpack which had the DNA that would match Victor Saldana, aka Magic from Inglewood 13. But it would not be until December when Inglewood 13 member Magic was in custody on unrelated charges when the police would send an informant into his cell. Magic would have a conversation with this informant and would actually admit to shooting Leggins back in February. And at the end of his trial, Victor Saldana, aka Little Magic, will be sentenced to 50 years to life in prison for murder. I want to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.